Hey guys, tonight we're going all the way back to a cold buggy on a Dakota road in the winter of 1883. There is a young farmer holding the reins, a quiet one, with a pair of fast horses and a sled that skims over the snow, and beside him, wrapped to the eyes in a shawl, there is a 16-year-old schoolteacher he is driving home. 12 miles out, 12 miles back, most every weekend now, in some of the coldest air this country can make. Her name is Laura, his name is Almanzo, and neither one of them knows yet that they are going to be married for the next 64 years, or everything those years are going to ask of them. I'm glad you're here tonight. If you like slow, true stories like this one, made for the end of a long day, subscribe and drift back tomorrow, but only if it genuinely helps you rest. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's a quiet comfort seeing who's settling in alongside you. And if you'd ever like to bring a little piece of this world home, our 3 little books live at prairiesecrets.com. Just scan the QR code on your screen, or if you're listening on your phone, you'll find the links waiting in the description and the pinned comments below. No hurry at all, they'll still be there in the morning. So get yourself comfortable. Turn the lamp down low, let the pillow take the whole weight of your head, and if you fall asleep somewhere in the middle of their story, that is perfectly all right. That is the entire idea. I'll keep watch. We're going to follow these two all the way from that snowy buggy to a farmhouse he spent 20 years building just for her, through the very best of it and the very worst of it, gently, with nowhere to be and nothing at all to hurry for. Our story starts small, the way the real ones usually do. It starts with the sound of harness bells and hard cold air, and a young man who is trying very hard to look like he is not in love. Picture that road in Dakota territory in the winter of 1883. There isn't much to it. 2 ruts running out toward a low grey horizon, with the wind doing most of the talking, and coming along it, moving faster than anything else for miles in any direction, there is a little cutter sleigh, pulled by 2 brown Morgan horses who quite clearly believe they own the place. Holding the lines is a young man named Almanzo Wilder. He is 24 years old that winter, or 26 if you believe the papers he filed with the land office, and we will get to why. He is not a big man. He is quiet and careful and good with his hands, and he has a kind of steadiness in him that never once shows off. What he has, more than anything else a man could own out here, is horses. Fast ones. In a town where most folks count themselves lucky to keep one tired plough horse alive through the winter, Almanzo Wilder keeps a matched team that can eat up 12 miles of frozen road like it is nothing at all, and that team, this particular winter, has a job. The job is sitting right beside him, bundled to the eyes, and her name is Laura Ingalls. She's 16. She has taken a teaching position at a little settlement school 12 miles out from town because her family needs the money, and because her older sister Mary is away at a college for the blind, and that costs more than a Prairie family tends to have. So Laura teaches children not much younger than she is, in a cold claim shanty, and through the week she boards out there with a family whose house is, we will be kind about it, not a happy one. She is homesick in the way that sits down low in your chest and does not leave, and every Friday without fail that little cutter and those 2 fast horses come skimming across the snow to carry her home for the weekend, and every Sunday they carry her back. Now, you have to understand what that drive actually is. 12 miles in an open sleigh in the middle of a Dakota winter is not a romantic thing, whatever the songs tell you. It is cold enough that your own breath freezes on your collar. He tucks hot flat irons down by her feet and folds a heavy buffalo robe over her lap, and even then it's not enough. Some of those Sundays the air is 40 degrees below zero, and the wind comes straight down out of the north with nothing between it and the top of the world to slow it down. He does not have to make that drive. Nobody on this earth is making him. He's a grown man with his own claim and his own troubles, and he is spending his one single day of rest driving 24 miles, there and back, in killing cold, to bring a 16-year-old girl safely home to her mother. He tells himself it is about the horses. They need the exercise, he says. They get restless, penned up all week, he says, and Laura, who is nobody's fool, lets him say it. You would have liked her, I think. She's small and quick and stubborn, with a temper she keeps mostly folded up out of sight, and she misses nothing. She notices that this quiet farmer never once complains about the cold. She notices that the horses are always brushed until they shine. She notices, though it will be years before either of them says it out loud, that a man does not drive 48 miles across a weekend in a Dakota winter for the good of his horses. He calls her Bess, not Laura the way everyone else does, but Bess, pulled quietly out of her middle name, Elizabeth, like a small private thing he gets to keep for himself. And she, in her turn, calls him Manly. Not Almanzo, Manly. Two people, out on a frozen road, each carrying a secret name for the other, and both of them absolutely certain they are being terribly subtle about the entire business. The courting, when it finally admits to being courting, moves at the speed of those horses and not one bit faster. When the spring comes and the snow lets go of the roads, the cutter gets put away and a light open buggy comes out, and the Sunday drives turn into long, slow afternoon ones, out past the last houses where the new grass is coming up green and the low wet sloughs are loud with frogs. There is a whole quiet ritual to it. The Sunday drive, in a place with almost nothing else in the world to do, a young man asks. A young woman says yes, or she says no. And if she keeps on saying yes, week after week, season after season, then everyone in a town the size of your thumbnail knows precisely what it means, long before the two people in the buggy will admit to a single thing. For about 3 years, Laura keeps saying yes. 3 years is a long courtship, and it is not all buggy rides and frogs. Almanzo is trying to prove up a homestead claim and a tree claim at the very same time, which is 2 grown men's work laid on the shoulders of one. And Laura is teaching and sewing and helping at home. There are long stretches where the drives simply stop for weeks, because there is no time in the day for them, but the horses always come back. And on one of those afternoons, the exact details of which nobody troubled to write down, so I am not going to invent them for you, the question finally gets asked plainly and answered plainly, and the thing that everyone already knew quietly becomes a fact. The sleigh bells go still. The horses stand steaming in the cold yard, and for one winter at least, that is that. Before we go on to the wedding, though, you should know one more thing about the man holding those reins, because it tells you exactly who he was on the days when nobody at all was watching. 3 winters before he was driving Laura home from that school, that same quiet young farmer did something the whole town would carry in their memory for the rest of their lives. The winter of 1880 and 1881 is the one the history books call the hard winter. The people who actually lived through it just called it the winter in a certain flat tone for the rest of their days, and everyone around them knew which one they meant. It began snowing in October, and it did not truly stop until April. Blizzard after blizzard after blizzard, sometimes only a day or 2 apart, each one burying the little town of De Smet a bit deeper than the last. The trains that carried in the flour and the coal and the kerosene could not get through the drifts. After a while, the railroad simply gave up and stopped trying until spring, and the town, sealed off with no deliveries and no fuel and no bread coming, began slowly and quietly and very politely to starve. By February, the flour was nearly gone. People were twisting handfuls of hay into tight little sticks to burn, because the coal had run out weeks before, and they were grinding what small seed wheat they had left in coffee mills, a cupful at a time, to make a coarse brown flour that was better than nothing, and not by much. The cold got into the houses and sat there. You would wake in the dark to find frost on the heads of the nails in the walls, and the fire already low, and the wind reading the same long sentence over and over in the stovepipe. Laura was in that town that winter, a girl of 13, in a thin frame house with her family listening to it. Almanzo was in it too, and word went quietly around that a young homesteader somewhere south of town, out past the open prairie, had brought in a good crop of wheat that last fall, and might still have it in his walls. Now Almanzo Wilder had wheat of his own. He had it hidden inside the wall of his claim shanty, seed wheat, saved back careful for the spring planting, because a farmer who eats his own seed has no crop the next year, and a farmer with no crop has no next year at all. He could have sat quietly on that wheat. A great many men would have. Instead, he and another young fellow named Cap Garland, who was all of 19 years old, hitched up their horses and drove straight out into the open country between 2 blizzards to go find that other farmer's grain. Just sit with the arithmetic of that for a moment. They went 12 miles out, with no road under them, no shelter anywhere, and no promise at all that the weather would hold, in a season where the weather had not held even once in 4 months. If a blizzard caught the two of them out in the open, that was simply the end. No heroics, no rescue coming. Just two young men and their horses gone under the snow until the spring thaw gave them back. They found the farmer. They talked him into selling, which took some real doing, because he wanted to keep that wheat every bit as badly. They loaded 60 bushels of it onto their sleds, and they turned for home, and the runners kept breaking through the hard crust every few yards into the frozen slough grass underneath, so that half the long trip back was spent heaving those loaded sleds up out of the snow by hand in the cold, with the light already starting to go. They came sliding back into town with the sky darkening, and the very next blizzard came howling in behind them almost on their heels, as if it had simply been waiting for them to make it. That wheat kept the whole of De Smet alive until the trains finally broke through in the spring. Almanzo never made much of it afterward. It was not in him to. This is the very same man, remember, who quietly shaved 2 years off his own age on his homestead papers, told the land office he was born in 1857 instead of 1859, so that he would be 21 and old enough to file for his claim a little sooner. Careful with the truth in the small, cautious ways a poor man learns to be careful. And then, when it actually counted for something, when the whole town was hungry, he drove himself straight out into the one thing that could kill him, and came home and did not bring it up again. That is the man who is driving Laura Ingalls home through the snow. She knows the story. Every last soul in De Smet knows the story. And a girl, if you think about it, could do a great deal worse than a quiet man with fast horses who runs toward the trouble instead of away from it. The lamp in the Ingalls kitchen window swims a little closer now, warm and yellow across the blue of the drifts. He will walk her to the door and say almost nothing, and turn his tired horses back out into the dark for home. And the snow keeps coming down, soft and patient, over a town that is only still standing because of him, and over a wedding that is a little over a year away now, though neither one of them is counting yet. And who is the girl in that sleigh? The one he keeps driving home through the cold? Because you may know the name, and still not know how much those first 16 years had already asked of her. She was born back east of all this, in the big woods of Wisconsin, in the winter of 1867, in a log cabin, the second of the daughters. And almost from the beginning her life had wheels under it, because her father was a mover. Charles Ingalls, her pa, is one of those men the frontier was full of, restless and hopeful, and forever certain that the next place, the one just over the horizon, was going to be the one where it all finally came good. He had bright eyes and a fiddle, and he could make a hard night bearable with that fiddle in a way Laura never forgot her whole life. And he could also, it must be said, never quite sit still, never quite stay, never quite stop believing that the answer was somewhere they had not moved to yet. So, Laura grew up on the road, down into Kansas, into Indian country when she was small, back to Wisconsin, out to Minnesota, to the banks of a creek called Plum Creek, where they lived for a while in a house dug into the earth like a burrow, and where the grasshoppers came one year in clouds that darkened the sun and ate every green thing they had planted down to the ground in a matter of days. There was a stretch in Iowa where the family ran a hotel for a time, hard years the books would later skip almost entirely. Somewhere in all that moving there had been a baby brother, a little boy who didn't live, another small grave left behind on the way to somewhere else. And through all of it, holding the whole moving household together, was her mother. Carolyn Ingalls, her ma, is the other half of the picture, and the opposite kind of person. Where Pa moved, Ma stayed put inside herself. She was refined and careful, and had been a schoolteacher once before all the wagons, and she carried a kind of quiet order with her that she laid down over each new rough place like a clean cloth over a bare table. She kept the girls in clean dresses and good manners in the middle of nowhere. She held the line, and she did it, mostly without complaint, folding away whatever it cost her where the children could not see it. If you want to know where Laura learned to carry the hard thing quietly and give the people she loved the warm version, you need look no further than the woman who raised her. And then, when Laura is about 12, The hardest thing of her childhood happens, and it happens to her sister. Mary, the eldest, the good one, the pretty golden-haired one that Laura measured herself against her whole young life, falls terribly ill with a fever, and when the fever finally breaks, Mary cannot see. She's gone blind, and she will stay blind for the rest of her life. Just like that. A bright girl of 14, in the dark for good. That is the thing that changes Laura, more than any move ever did. Because from then on, in a way, Laura becomes Mary's eyes. It falls to her to describe the world aloud for her sister, the colour of the sky, the look of the prairie, the way the light moved on the grass so that Mary can still somehow see it through her. And it turns out Laura is extraordinary at this. She has to find the exact words for things, the true ones, the ones that put a picture in a blind girl's mind. She spends her girlhood learning, out of pure love and necessity, to do the one thing she will later do for the whole world, to take what is in front of her and put it into words so plain and so right that someone who cannot see it can see it anyway. By the time the family lands in De Smet, in the Dakota territory, and stops more or less at last, Laura is nearly grown. She is small and quick and sharp-eyed and stubborn, shaped by a childhood of moving and losing and holding on, of a father who dreamed and a mother who coped, and a sister she loved and learned to see for. She has known hunger. She has known the grasshopper year and the long winter and the small graves. She has never once in her life had money, or a house that stayed, or a year she could count on. She's 16 years old, and she has already lived about 3 ordinary lifetimes, and that is the girl the young farmer with the fast horses keeps driving home through the snow. Not some soft thing who needs rescuing. A girl who has already survived nearly everything the frontier can throw and kept her temper folded up out of sight and learned to find the warm word for the cold thing. 2 people, it turns out, cut from very much the same hard cloth, which is exactly why, when everything we are about to watch comes down on the 2 of them, they will bend again and again and somehow never quite break. The wedding, when it finally comes, is almost comically small. And it is small on purpose. It is the summer of 1885. Laura is 18 now, and the thing that finally sets a date is not romance at all. It is a letter. Almanzo's older sister, Eliza Jane, writes to say that she is coming to De Smet to give the young couple a proper wedding, a big one, a church full of people and a fine dress, and all the trimmings a respectable family ought to put on for such a thing. You need to understand who Eliza Jane is to feel the small, quiet horror this letter causes. She is Almanzo's strong-willed older sister, and she had once been Laura's own schoolteacher back in De Smet, and the 2 of them had not exactly gotten along. Eliza Jane is a woman with opinions and the energy to act on all of them at once. And now she's coming to organise the most important day of Laura's life, whether Laura likes it or not. Laura and Almanzo take one look at that letter and quietly panic in the same direction. Because here is the truth of it. Neither one of them wants the fuss, and even more to the point, neither one of them can begin to afford it. A big wedding means a fine new dress they do not have the money for, and a spread of food they cannot spare, and standing up in front of a whole town to be looked at, which is close to Laura's idea of misery. So they do the only sensible thing 2 poor, private, stubborn young people can do. They move the wedding up. They decide to marry right away, quietly this week, before Eliza Jane can arrive with her lists and her plans and take the whole thing over. There is no white gown. Laura does not own one, and there is no time and no money to make one now. What she has is a new dress of black cashmere, dark and soft and practical, the nicest thing she owns, a dress she will be able to wear again for good for years to come. So she is married in black, which sounds to us now like a funeral, and was in those days simply what a sensible woman did. You bought one good dress. You did not buy a dress you could only ever wear for a few hours of one single day. And then there is the matter of the vows. A few days before the wedding, Laura tells Almanzo something plainly, the way she tends to say the things that matter. She tells him she cannot promise to obey him. She has watched marriages, She has watched women fold themselves down to nothing. She will be his wife and his partner, and she will work beside him until she drops. But she will not stand up in front of God and a preacher and promise to obey a man like a child promises a parent. And she is braced, a little, for the argument. There is no argument. Almanzo tells her in so many words that he would not want her to obey him even if she offered, that it is a foolish thing to ask of anybody, that he has no more wish to be somebody's master than she has to be somebody's servant, and he goes and speaks to the minister about it himself. The minister's a large, blunt, plain-spoken man named Reverend Edward Brown, a cousin, so the story around town goes, of the famous John Brown. He has strong opinions of his own, and the word obey is one he is fond of. But he agrees. And so, on the 25th of August, 1885, Laura Ingalls stands up and marries Almanzo Wilder without once promising to obey him. In 1885. That was not a small thing. That was very nearly a radical one, and she did it in a black dress on a Tuesday morning without making any speeches about it at all. The morning itself is plain and hot and over almost before it starts. They drive into town. There are a couple of witnesses and the Reverend Brown and his wife, and a few short minutes of quiet words in a front parlour, and then it is done. No music, no crowd, no feast laid out on long tables. Just two people and a signature, and the ordinary sound of a summer morning going on outside the window, as if nothing enormous had happened in that room at all. And then he helps her up into the buggy, the same kind of buggy that started all of this, and he drives his new wife out of town toward the little house he's built, and waiting for her on his tree claim, where a small, quiet wedding supper is set out on the table. That is the whole wedding. It cost almost nothing. It lasted almost no time, and it held for the next 64 years, which is longer than most of the grand ones ever manage. The horses turn up the track toward the little house, and that, for one warm afternoon, is the beginning of everything. The house he brings her home to is worth stopping in for a minute, because he built it with his own hands, and you can tell. It is a little grey house, on the tree claim, small and snug and square, the kind of house a careful carpenter makes when he's building for somebody he loves and has almost no money to do it with. Almanzo is genuinely good at this. He is the sort of man who fits a joint so it stays fitted, who hangs a door so it swings true and latches soft. Inside there is a bedroom and a lean-to for a kitchen, and a pantry that he built out special, with shelves and a little window and hooks, and a place for everything, because he had watched his own mother work in cramped kitchens all his childhood, and he wanted his wife to have room to turn around. For Laura, who is barely 18, all of this is a small daily astonishment, a house of her own stove, her own table, her own pantry with her own dishes on the shelves. She has spent her whole life so far in other people's arrangements, in her father's houses, moving when he decided to move, sleeping where there was room. Now there is a door that is hers to open and shut. There is bread rising because she set it rising. There is a lamp she lit, on a table she wiped down, in a room that answers to nobody but the two of them. The first year is a hopeful one, and it is worth saying that plainly, because there is a great deal of weather coming, and I do not want you to think it was always hard. It was not always hard. In the beginning it was mostly good. Almanzo has his team and his tools and 200 acres of Dakota Prairie between the homestead and the tree claim, and he has a plan, and the plan is wheat. Wheat is the crop that turns into cash. A good wheat harvest, hauled to town and sold, pays down what a man owes and buys what his family needs, and leaves a little over toward next year. That is the whole dream, laid out flat and simple. Put the seed in, let the rain come. Bring the gold in off the field in the fall. Do it a few years running and you are no longer poor. There is only one small crack in the dream, and neither of them looks at it too hard that first happy year. The crack is that Almanzo, like nearly every young farmer starting out on that prairie, is already in debt. He borrowed to buy the machinery, the reaper and the plough, and the seed and the second team, because you cannot farm two claims by hand and a man has to spend money to make money, everyone did it. The whole country out there ran on borrowed money and next year's crop. As long as the crops came in, the borrowing was just the sensible cost of getting started. As long as the crops came in, but that first year they do come in, more or less, and the young Wilders eat well enough, and the horses are fat, and on the good evenings Almanzo comes in from the field to a lit house and a warm supper, and a wife who is glad to see him, and the two of them sit a while in the quiet with the prairie going dark blue outside the window. They are young, they are strong. They are sure, the way you're only ever sure when you are young and strong, that the hard part is behind them, and the good years are the ones coming up ahead. And for a little while, out there in the little grey house, nobody argues with the quiet. Their first winter as man and wife closes the whole world down to the size of that little house, and neither one of them minds it even a little. The cutter and the buggy get put away when the snow comes, the way they always did, and the long courting drives give way to something new and quieter, which is simply being married in the winter in a snug house with nowhere either of you has to be. Outside, the Dakota cold does what it does, piling up white against the north wall, reading its long sentence in the stovepipe. Inside, there is a stove that Almanzo keeps fed, and a lamp, and the smell of bread, and the two of them, learning each other in the close warm way that only a first married winter teaches you. Because that is the year you find out who a person really is. Not the version that drove 12 miles to bring you home and drove 12 miles back. The everyday one. The one who is there in the morning before the light, and there at night when the lamp goes out, and there all the long white hours in between. Laura learns the shape of his days. The early trip to the barn to the horses, no matter the weather. The careful economy of a man who has always had to count. The long silences that are not sulks but simply the way he is. And Almanzo learns hers, the quick hands, the folded temper, the way she notices everything and says only about half of it, the standards she holds a house to, even when the house is small and the money is short. There are the small firsts that make a marriage, and most of them are far too ordinary to have made it into any book. Their first suppers across their own table, the first time the bread does not rise and they eat it anyway and laugh about it, the working out of whose job is whose, the 100 tiny treaties that two people sign without words in the first months of sharing a roof, who banks the fire at night, which side of the bed, how he likes his coffee, how she likes the lamp turned. The whole quiet architecture of a life together, going up joint by joint as careful and as invisible as the joinery and the walls around them, and it is happy. I want to keep saying that, in this early part because so much hard weather is coming, that it would be easy to forget they ever had this, but they did. They had a first winter in a warm little house, young and in love and sure of the future, snowed in together with a good stove and enough to eat and nothing pulling at them yet. On the long evenings he might have taken up some small bit of woodwork by the lamp, and she her sewing, and the wind might have talked to itself in the eaves while the two of them sat in the kind of comfortable quiet that does not need filling. If you could go back and give them anything, you might just give them more nights like those. As it happened, they did not get very many before the world started asking for its due, which is all the more reason to sit here in this one with them a while, in the warm, in the lamplight, with the snow coming down soft over a happiness they had not yet been asked to pay for. The stove ticks as it cools, the lamp burns low, and two young people, married a few short months, sleep easy in a snug little house at the edge of the world with no idea at all what is coming and no reason yet to lie awake. The next good thing to arrive comes in the deep cold of December, in the winter of 1886, and it arrives small and loud and perfect. Their daughter is born on the 5th of December, in the little grey house, with the prairie locked hard in white outside the window. They name her Rose. There are wild roses that come up pink and low across that Dakota land in the summer, the kind that grow where nobody planted them and ask nothing of anyone, and the name has that in it. A hardy thing. A pretty thing that does not need much to bloom. Laura is 19 years old now, and a mother. Almanzo is a father, and by every account we have he is quietly undone by it, in the way of quiet men who did not expect their own hearts to turn over quite so completely. There is a cradle in the little house now. There is the particular sound a house takes on when there is a baby in it. The small snuffling breathing in the night, the sudden cries, the long stretches of listening even to the silence to make sure the silence is the good kind. Laura learns to do everything one-handed the way mothers do. The bread still gets made, the lamp still gets lit. There is just a baby on her hip now while she does it. You know that feeling maybe, if you have ever had a very small person fall asleep on your chest and refuse to be put down, the way the whole day rearranges itself around one warm, sleeping weight. That is this house now. That is these two, bent over a cradle in a snowbound little place at the edge of the settled world, arranging their whole lives around a baby who has no idea yet how lucky she is, or how much these two people are going to go through to keep her. For a while, and it is a real while, they are simply a happy young family, and I want you to sit in that with them for a minute before the weather turns, because they earned it, and they did not get to keep it very long. Almanzo is up before the light. That is the rhythm of it. Out to the barn in the blue dark to the horses who nicker at him because they know his step. And then the long day in the fields or the yard, the endless mending and building and hauling and planting that a farm demands and never stops demanding. He is good at it. He likes it even. The horses especially, always the horses. And Laura runs the house, which in 1887 is not the light word we make of it now. She hauls the water, she keeps the fire, and the fire is not a switch. It is a living thing you feed all day, or it dies and takes your supper and your warmth with it. She bakes the bread, churns the butter, tends the garden, puts food by for the winter in jars and crocks and the root cellar, sews the clothes, washes them by hand in water she heated herself, and minds the baby through all of it. And in the evenings, the good evenings, he comes in from the cold to a lit and living house. There is a meal on the table because she made it. There is a child who lights up at the sight of him, and the two of them sit a while afterward in the low lamplight with the dishes done and the baby down, not always saying much, because they are the kind of people who do not always need to. Out past the window the prairie goes from gold to rose to deep blue to black, and the wind picks up its evening conversation with the eaves, and a young husband and a young wife sit together in a small warm room they built out of almost nothing, tired in the good way, sure that this is the shape of the years to come. On the fine Sundays they still drive out. Of course they do. Only now there are 3 of them in the buggy, with Rose bundled up small and warm between her mother and father, and the same fast horses out in front, older now and steadier, carrying the little family along the summer roads past the green wheat and the low pink roses. If you had passed them on the road in those years, you would have seen exactly what they looked like, which was a young family with everything ahead of them, and you would have been right about the everything. You would just have been wrong, as they were, about how much of it was going to be joy. Because the wheat is beautiful in those first years. It comes up green and thick, and it turns gold, and it pays, more or less, and the debt sits there in the background like a thing that will get handled in good time once one really fine harvest comes in and clears the books. That's the plan. One really fine harvest. It is always only one really fine harvest away. The lamp burns down, the baby sleeps, and out on the dark fields the wheat stands quiet and gold and full of promise, and nobody in that little house has any reason yet to lie awake and watch the sky. The trouble, when it comes, does not come all at once, and that is somehow the cruelest way it could have come. It starts with the rain, or rather with the rain not coming. The first year it is just a dry spell, the kind every farmer shrugs at, because dry spells break. Then the spell does not break, the spring stays dry, and the summer comes in hot and hard and mean, and out of the southwest comes the wind the old-timers on that prairie learn to dread. A hot wind, a wind with the heat of an open oven door in it, that blows for days and pulls the water right up out of the ground and out of the young wheat and leaves the blades curling and pale. Almanzo stands at the edge of his field and watches his year turn brown in front of him. There is nothing to do. That is the thing about it that gets into a man. There is no amount of work that fixes a sky. He can be up before light and out past dark. He can be the best and steadiest farmer in the whole county, and it does not matter one bit because the wheat needs rain, and the rain is somewhere else. He has poured his money into that ground, borrowed money, and his labour, and his whole plan for the years to come, and he stands there in the hot wind and watches it die. And when it is not the drought, it is the hail. There is a particular kind of story that prairie farmers tell, and every one of them has some version of it, about the crop that was going to be the one. The year it finally came up thick and green and heavy-headed and gold, the year that was going to clear the debt and set them right. And how they watched it ripen, and counted the days to the harvest, and then watched a bank of cloud come up green-black in the west one afternoon, an hour sometimes before they meant to start cutting, and how the hail came down and beat a whole year flat into the mud in about 10 minutes, while they stood in the doorway and could not do one single thing but watch. That is the weather the Wilders are farming in now. Not every year is a total loss, but enough of them are, and a farm cannot take enough of them. Here is what a failed crop actually means, because this is the part the pretty version leaves out, and it is the part that decides everything that happens to these two for the next 10 years. When the crop fails, the debt does not fail with it. That is the trap, laid out plain. Almanzo borrowed money to buy the reaper and the seed and the team, the way everyone did, on the honest expectation that the harvest would pay it back. But when there is no harvest, the money is still owed. The reaper payment still comes due. The taxes on the land still come due. And now, on top of all that, the family still has to eat through the winter, and there has to be seed to put in the ground come spring, or there is no next chance at all. So a man who has just lost his crop has to go back and borrow again. More money to buy food and seed, piled on top of the money he already could not pay. And the interest on that kind of money, borrowed by a failing farmer with nothing but next year's weather for collateral, was not kind. Years later, their daughter Rose, grown up and looking back, would put an actual number on it. 36%, she said. 36 cents on every dollar every year, on money her parents borrowed just to buy food. And 7 years, she said. 7 successive years of the crop failing, of work and weather and sickness grinding the health right out of her father, before that land finally let go of them. When you hear it as a number, it sounds almost quiet. 36%, 7 years. Lived, day by day, it is a slow hand closing. You can watch it happen in the small things. In Laura turning a collar and patching a patch. In a dress of black cashmere getting thinner at the elbows year by year. In Almanzo sitting up late at the table after the others are asleep, with a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper, and the lamp turned low to save the kerosene, adding the same terrible column of figures over and over, as if this time it might come out different. In the good horses, the fast ones, the ones he loved, quietly sold, because you cannot keep fine driving horses when you cannot buy flour. Piece by piece, the little life they built comes apart in their hands, not with any single disaster, but with the patient arithmetic of too much owed and too little grown. And still, some nights, it is just an ordinary evening. That is the strange mercy of a hard life, that it does not feel like a tragedy every hour of every day. There are still suppers. There is still a small girl to be washed and put to bed. There is still a lamp to carry from the table to the bedroom at the end of a long day, and a husband and a wife too tired to talk, lying in the dark of a house that is slipping away from them, listening to the same wind holding on. The mending basket can wait until tomorrow. Tonight there is nothing to be done but rest and be grateful for the girl asleep in the next room and let the lamp go out. And that lamp, carried through a dark house at the end of a hard day, is much of the reason this channel exists. If these quiet hours mean something to you, 10 of these prairie stories are written down now in a little book called Evenings on the Prairie, over at prairiesecrets.com. That can wait for morning, though. Right now the wind has found the eaves, and the story goes on. Because in the spring of 1888, the trouble stops being about money and starts being about their bodies. It begins the way these things so often did on the frontier, quietly, and then all at once. Diphtheria comes into the house. If you have never had cause to fear that word, count yourself lucky, because for most of human history it was one of the words that emptied cradles. It is a disease of the throat, and it comes on with a fever and an ache, and in the worst cases it closes the throat entirely. There were no shots for it then. There was no medicine that touched it. There was a doctor if you could get one, and there was nursing, and there was waiting, and there was luck. And that was the whole of what stood between a family and the grave. And it does not take one of them. It takes both. Laura and Almanzo are both struck down at the same time, the two of them burning with fever in the same small house, too weak to care for each other, let alone for a not quite 2-year-old girl. So Rose is bundled up and taken away, out of the sick house, to be looked after by family until the danger passes. Picture that for just a moment. The two of them, gravely ill, listening to their own daughter's voice fade off down the road in someone else's wagon, not knowing, either of them, whether they will be alive to see her brought back. They live. I will tell you that now plainly, so you're not lying there afraid for them. They both come through the fever. The throat does not close. The luck holds. Rose comes home, and for a little while it seems as though the family has been handed the one mercy it needed, that the worst thing walked up to their door and then, at the last, walked away. But diphtheria does not always leave a person the way it found them, and it does not leave Almanzo the way it found him. Here is what happens as near as anyone can say it. He is a farmer. It is spring, and a farm in spring does not care that the man who runs it has just been half killed by a fever. The seed has to go in. The stock has to be tended. The work is standing there in the yard the moment he can stand up, and there is no one else to do it, and no money to hire it done. So Almanzo Wilder does what a certain kind of man always does. He gets up too soon. He goes back out to the work before his body is anywhere near ready, because the work will not wait, and he cannot afford to let it, and somewhere out there, pushing himself at a job his strength has not come back for, something in him gives way. It is his legs mostly. A weakness. A numbness that will not lift. The doctors of the day had a word for it, a complication that sometimes follows the fever, striking the nerves after the throat has healed. What it means for him, in plain terms, is that his legs stop fully answering him. For a while he can barely walk at all, and though the worst of it does slowly ease over the months that follow, it never fully leaves. Almanzo Wilder is not yet 30 years old, and he is going to walk with a cane and move stiff and careful and pay for hard days with hard nights for the rest of his long life. You have to understand what that takes from a man like him. His whole worth, as he was raised to measure it, is in his body, in the strength of his back and the skill of his hands and the miles his legs can carry him across a field in a day. He is the young man who drove 12 miles into a killing blizzard because his body could do it and other men's could not. And now, at not yet 30, that body has quietly handed in its notice. He will spend the rest of his life doing everything slower, everything harder, everything with a cane leaned against the fence post nearby, than the man he was at 23. And here is the thing about Almanzo Wilder, the thing that is going to matter more than almost anything else in this whole long story. He does not stop. He does not become bitter, as far as anyone who knew him ever recorded, and he does not sit down in the corner and let the farm and the family fall to Laura. He simply, quietly, learns to do it all a different way. If he cannot do a thing standing, he finds a way to do it sitting. If he cannot do it fast, he does it slow. He leans more on his hands, on the carpentry and the woodwork he was always so good at. Work a seated man with clever fingers can still do beautifully. The cane becomes just another tool, and Laura, watching her young husband refuse to be finished, learns something about the man she married that no buggy ride ever could have taught her. She learns that the steadiness she noticed on that frozen road goes all the way down, that whatever happens, he will find a way to get up in the morning and do the next thing. It is not a dramatic kind of courage. It does not make speeches. It just gets up again and again, leaning on a cane, and goes back to work. The cane goes by the door now, and a young couple who were poor and in debt but whole are now poor and in debt and marked, one of them for good. And still there is a small girl to raise and a supper to get, and a tomorrow coming whether they are ready for it or not. They are 21 and 30 years old, and the hardest year of their lives has not even arrived yet. That summer, in the middle of all of it, the drought and the debt and the cane by the door, there is one bright thing coming. Laura is expecting another child, and you can imagine what that means to them in a year like this one. On a farm in those days, a child was not only a joy, though it was that. A child was the future in the most practical sense there is. A son especially. A son was another pair of hands coming someday, another back for the fields, someone to help carry the place, and someday to carry it on. So when Laura gives birth, in the early days of August, 1889, to a healthy boy, it lands in that struggling little house like the first good news in a very long time. A son, after everything. Maybe they let themselves think, maybe this is the turn. Maybe this is where it starts to come right. He lives 12 days. I am going to tell it to you plainly, because they lived it plainly, and because I think the people it happened to deserve that. The baby is well, and then the baby is not well, and it comes on fast, the way it did with the little ones then. Some seizure of the small new body that no one in 1889 had any way to stop, and before he is 2 weeks old, before he has been given a name that anyone wrote down, their son is gone. A boy, born into the hardest year of their lives, who got not quite 2 weeks of it, and then was buried on that Dakota prairie in a grave that Laura Ingalls Wilder, who put nearly everything else in her life onto paper, would never once write about. Not in the books, not anywhere. For the rest of her long life she kept that particular silence complete. Some griefs you carry. You do not hang them on the wall, so we will not linger in that room. We will do what they had to do, which is to stand up in the terrible quiet after and keep breathing and go on. But I want you to know it happened, and I want you to know they felt every ounce of it, because the pretty version of this family leaves that little boy out entirely, and he was here, and he mattered, and somebody ought to say so gently in the dark. There, it is said. And now we let it rest. Rest, though, is not what that August had in store for them, because grief on the frontier did not wait its turn. In the same weeks that they bury their son, their house burns down. The accounts differ on exactly how it started. Something in the stove, most likely on an ordinary day, the way 100 prairie houses caught over the ears, a spark, a draught, a moment's turned back. What is not in dispute is how fast it went. These were small, dry wooden houses, built quick, and when they caught they did not smoulder, they went up, and there was rarely time to save more than yourselves and whatever your hands could carry through the door on the way out. Little Rose, not yet 3, would remember it her whole life. She remembered the heat of it. That was the piece that stayed with her decades later, an old woman recalling a 2-year-old's memory. The heat. And so, in one August, in one handful of weeks, the Wilders lose their infant son and their home, and every last thing inside it. On top of the drought, on top of the debt at 36 cents on the dollar, on top of a husband who now walks with a cane. If you were writing this as a story, an editor would send it back and tell you it was too much, that no one would believe one family could be handed all of that at once. But nobody was writing it. It was just happening to 2 real people in their early 20s and their little girl standing in a yard in Dakota watching the smoke go up where their home used to be. This is the bottom. I want to mark it for you clearly because from here, slowly, so slowly you can barely see it happening, the road finally begins to turn back up. But right now, in the late summer of 1889, Laura and Almanzo Wilder have almost nothing left. A borrowed roof, a few things carried out of a fire, a daughter, a cane, each other, and a great deal of money owed on land that will not grow them anything. What they have, it turns out, is enough. Not enough to stay, but enough to leave and to begin again somewhere else, which is the only thing left to do. And a great deal of the rest of this story, all 60 more years of it, comes down to that one quiet fact. that when they had been stripped of very nearly everything two people can be stripped of, the two of them looked at what was left, which was mostly just each other, and decided, without any speeches about it, that it would do. That they would take the daughter and the cane and the little they could carry, and they would go, together, and try again. The smoke thins out over an empty yard, and somewhere in the ashes of the worst year of their lives, without either of them saying a grand word about it, a marriage that a lesser one would have cracked wide open simply, quietly, holds. The leaving, when they finally do it, is not one dramatic departure. It is a slow, sensible retreat, the kind exhausted people make, one careful step at a time toward anywhere that is not here. The first step takes them east, back to Minnesota, to the little town of Spring Valley, where Almanzo's own parents have a good established farm. James and Angelina Wilder are not poor the way their son has become poor. They have the solid, settled place that James built over a lifetime, the kind of place Almanzo once assumed he would build too. And they open it to the wrecked young family without a fuss. Come home, in effect. Come and rest. Let us take some of this off you for a while. So for something like a year, Laura and Almanzo simply stop. And after the years they have had, you can almost feel the whole household exhale. There is a big warm kitchen that is not Laura's to run, and not falling down around her. There is Almanzo's mother, moving through her own rooms, glad to have a small granddaughter underfoot. There is food that came off a farm that actually produced, and a doctor within reach, and long, quiet days where the only job is to get a little of your strength back. Almanzo's legs have the rest they never got in that first terrible spring. Rose, 3 years old now, is petted and fed and surrounded by family. For the first time in years, nobody in that house is lying awake doing arithmetic in the dark. And yet, you know how this feels, maybe, if you have ever had to move back in with family as a grown adult after a hard time. There is the relief of it, which is real and deep, and there is the quiet ache underneath the relief, which is also real. Because Laura had her own house once. Her own stove, her own door, her own pantry that Almanzo built to fit her. And now she is a guest in another woman's kitchen, a grown wife with nothing of her own, grateful and dependent and quietly counting the days until they can stand on their own feet again. It is a good year. It is a healing year. And neither one of them ever mistakes it for home. When they go looking for the next thing, they go looking, of all directions, south. Almanzo's health is the reason. Somebody has the idea, and it was a common idea then, that a warm climate might do for his legs and his lungs what the hard north never would. And so, sometime around 1891, the little family packs up again and travels a very long way to a place about as different from the Dakota Prairie as anywhere in the country could be. They go to Westville, Florida. Now, on paper, it works. That is the strange part. The warmth does seem to help him. The soft, wet southern air is kinder to his damaged body than the killing winters ever were, and he does regain some strength down there among the pine woods and the humidity. If the whole point had been Almanzo's health and only that, Florida might have been the answer. But Laura cannot stand it, and it is worth understanding why, because it tells you something about her. It is not just the heat, though the heat is a wall you walk into. It is that she is a prairie woman, a northern woman, bred to wide-open country and cold, clean air and long sight lines, and she has been set down in a close, green, dripping backwoods among people whose ways are not her ways, and who look at this small, sharp-eyed, independent northern woman as something foreign and not entirely welcome. She feels like an outsider, because she is one. She misses the openness. She misses the cold, if you can believe it. She misses being somewhere she understood. There is a wariness that settles into her down there, a sense of not being safe and not being home, and it does not lift. So Florida, which cured part of what was wrong with Almanzo, is no cure at all for what ails the two of them together, which is that they have no place of their own and no clear way back to one. They do not stay long. Within a year or so, the wagon is loaded again, and they turn north, back toward the only place that had ever really been theirs, back toward De Smet and the open sky and the family they knew. They're going home, not to anything easy, just to something they understood. And sometimes, when you have lost as much as they have lost, understood is the most you can ask of a place, and it is enough to point the horses toward. Back in De Smet, they do the least romantic and most important thing two broke people can possibly do. They start saving. They rent a small house in town. There is no talk now of homesteads and grand wheat harvests and getting rich off the land. That dream burned down with the house. The new plan is smaller and harder and far more likely to work, and the plan is this: earn a little, spend almost none of it, and do that patiently for as long as it takes to put together a stake big enough to start over one final time. Somewhere the ground might actually be kind to them. So Laura goes to work. She takes a job as a seamstress in a dressmaker's shop in town, and she's good at it, quick and neat, and she sits and sews for other women, long days of it for wages. It is not glamorous work. It is close, eye-straining, back-aching work, hunched over other people's fine dresses while your own stay plain. But it is money, steady money, coming in that does not depend on the rain. And Almanzo does whatever his body will let him do, and his body will still let him do a good deal if he's careful about it. He hires out as a carpenter, which is the perfect trade for a man who is clever with his hands and can no longer trust his legs, and he takes day labour where he can get it. Between the two of them, coin by coin, the little pile begins to grow. And here is a small mercy in this chapter worth naming. Her family is right there. Her mother and father, Charles and Caroline. Her sisters, Mary home from her college for the blind, and Carrie and Grace. After the years of illness and fire and wandering, Laura is back among the people she came from, in the town where she grew up, and there is a steadiness in that. Sunday dinners, familiar faces, her father's fiddle, maybe, of an evening. It is not prosperity, but it is people and belonging, and a place where everyone knows your name, and after Florida that is no small thing. For about 2 years they live like this, careful, frugal, heads down. Two people in their 20s who have already lost more than most people lose in a lifetime, quietly and stubbornly building themselves one more chance, and slowly, out of all that self-denial, a real sum comes together. $100. It does not sound like much now. Then, to them, it was everything. It was 2 years of skipped comforts and turned collars and long days bent over a needle. It was folded up small, the entire future of the Wilder family, and they were about to bet all of it on a place none of them had ever seen. On the 17th of July, 1894, the wagon is loaded for the last time. They're going to Missouri, to the Ozark Hills in the south of the state, a country they know only from bright brochures and the talk of a neighbour who had gone down to look and come back full of it. The land of the big red apple, the pamphlets called it. Country where the winters were gentler and the fruit grew heavy and a hard-working family could make a place. It is a leap of pure faith, aimed at a spot on a map. But they have made their peace with leaping. It is the staying that broke them. So they pack the covered wagon, and they hitch the horses, and Laura and Almanzo and 7-year-old Rose pull out of De Smet, and this time they are not coming back. It is a long way to Missouri by wagon. Something like 650 miles of it, at the pace of a walking horse, which means weeks on the road, better than a month of it, camping at the side of the trail, cooking over fires, Rose walking alongside the wheels in the dust to spare the team. The whole family's life packed into a box on wheels rolling slowly south through the high summer heat. And somewhere in that wagon, tucked away safe, is the $100 bill, their entire savings. Everything those 2 years of sewing and carpentry and doing without had come to, rolled into one piece of paper. Laura kept it hidden in a little wooden writing desk she had, a lap desk with a slot in it, and she knew exactly where it was every mile of that trip, the way you know where the most precious thing you own is when your whole future depends on not losing it. And then, at the end of the journey, at the worst possible moment, it is gone. They have reached Mansfield. They have found the piece of land they want, 40 acres of rough wooded hillside just outside town, and they have come to town to make the deal, to hand over that $100 and turn a spot on a map into a place of their own at last. And Laura opens the little desk to take out the bill, and it is not there. Sit in that for 1 second with her. Everything. 2 years of it. Every skipped meal and strained eye and coin denied. The entire future of her family. Gone apparently somewhere on 650 miles of open road, and no way on earth to ever find it. I do not think there is a person listening who cannot feel exactly what the floor of her stomach did in that moment. They search, and the bill has not been stolen, and it has not been dropped on some forgotten roadside in Kansas. It has slipped down, out of its slot into a narrow crack inside the desk itself, worked loose by 6 weeks of jolting over rough country, hidden right there in the one thing she had trusted to hold it. They find it, they get it out, and the $100, which had just died and come back to life in the space of about a minute, goes down on the counter, and 40 acres of rocky Missouri hillside becomes at long last theirs. It is the last day of August, 1894. They have been married 9 years. They have buried a son, lost a house to fire, watched drought and debt take everything they built, and crossed half a country in a wagon to bet their final $100 on a piece of ground they had never laid eyes on. And now they stand on it, the three of them, tired and dusty, and finally in one place they can call their own. It does not look like much. It is stony and steep and half wild, but it is theirs, and they are done running. The first years on Rocky Ridge are not the reward. Not yet. I want to be honest with you about that, because it would be a lovely story if they crossed into Missouri and everything went soft and easy, and that is not what happened. What happened is that they traded one kind of hard for another, and the new kind at least was theirs. The land they bought is rough. It is steep and stony, and half of it is standing timber, and none of it has ever been farmed. There is no fine farmhouse waiting. There is a little windowless log cabin, and that is where the three of them live at first, in one room, while they begin the enormous slow work of turning wild hill country into a farm. Almanzo clears the timber a tree at a time, careful with his legs, resting when he has to. And in one of those small details that tells you everything about how thin things still are, in the early days a good part of what money comes in comes from selling wagon loads of firewood in town. 50 cents a load, that is the Wilder family income some weeks. 50 cents at a time for a wagon full of wood cut by a man who walks with a cane, hauled into Mansfield behind the horses. But here is the difference, and it is everything. This time, the ground answers. The Ozarks are not the drought-cracked Dakota plains. There is rain here, and a longer, gentler season, and the things they plant mostly grow. Almanzo, who learned the hardest possible lesson about betting everything on one crop, does not make that mistake twice. He does not plant a sea of wheat and pray. He plants a little of everything. Chickens for eggs to sell, a few cows for milk and butter, berries, a garden, and most of all apple trees, row on row of them set into the cleared hillside, because this is apple country and everyone says the fruit is where the future is. The apple trees take 7 years to bear. Think about what kind of people you have to be by now to plant a tree that will not feed you for 7 years. These are two people who have learned patience the hard way, in the only school that teaches it. They have learned that you put the thing in the ground and you tend it and you wait, and you do not get to rush it, and some of it dies and you plant again. So they set the little trees into the rocky soil, knowing the fruit is most of a decade off, and they tend them, and they wait, and in the meantime they sell their 50-cent loads of wood, and their eggs and their butter, and they hold on. And slowly, tree by tree and hen by hen and year by year, the wild hillside starts, at last, to become a farm. The house is the thing I most want you to see, though, because the house is Almanzo's answer to his whole life, and he builds it, board by board, himself. It does not go up all at once. Nothing in their life ever did. He builds the farmhouse the way he cleared the land, slowly, a piece at a time, as the money and his strength allow, over the better part of 20 years. 20 years. He starts with almost nothing, and he keeps adding, a room here, a proper kitchen there, until the little rough beginning has grown into a rambling 10-room farmhouse, one of the finest in that whole part of the county. And he builds nearly all of it himself, this man with the cane, this carpenter whose legs betrayed him at 30 and whose hands never once did. And it is in the details of that house that you can read how he felt about her, better than any letter could tell you, because Almanzo Wilder was not a man of many words, but he was a man of exact and loving work. Laura is small, she's barely 5 feet tall, and a house, in those days, was built to standard heights that assumed a taller person, so that a small woman spent her whole life reaching up, straining for shelves set too high, working at counters built for somebody else's body. So when Almanzo builds her kitchen, he builds it to her. He sets the counters low to her height, so she can work without reaching. He builds the cabinets and the shelves where her hands actually fall. He fits the whole working heart of that house to his wife's small frame, cabinet by cabinet measured against her, so that for the rest of her life she can move through her own kitchen with everything exactly where it ought to be. He builds the fireplaces too, great stone ones, out of rocks he and the hired help gathered off their own land. The same stony ground that made the farming so hard turned into the warm heart of the rooms. That is the love story, not the buggy rides, lovely as they were. This, a man who lost his health and his first home, and his son and years of his life to bad luck and bad weather, quietly spending 20 years building his wife a house measured to her own body, one careful joint at a time, so that she would never have to reach for anything again. He could not give her an easy life. The world had made very sure of that, so he gave her this instead, a house that fit her, built to last, that stood there solid and warm and exactly hers while everything that had ever hurt them slowly faded into the past. And she lived in it and loved it, and it is still standing today. The apple trees came in time. The farm grew to 200 acres. And the little windowless cabin where they started became a memory at the bottom of the hill, the way the worst years become a memory when you finally climb up out of them. Rose is the other person in that house, and she grows up to be a wonder and a worry both at once, the way the brightest children so often are. She's an only child in the end, that little girl who rode between them in the buggy, the one who remembered the heat of the fire. The brother who might have been never got the chance, and so everything her parents had, all their hope and all their fierce protectiveness, comes down on Rose. And Rose is clever in a way that a small Ozark farm cannot hold for very long. She reads everything. She's quick and hungry and restless, and by the time she's a young woman she's gone, out into a world that is opening up fast in the early years of the new century, and what she does with it is genuinely something. This farm girl from the Rocky Hills of Missouri becomes a telegrapher, and then a newspaper woman out in San Francisco, and then a writer, a real one, a working professional author who travels the world. She goes to Europe. She lives at various times in places her parents could not have found on a map when they were young, and she writes for magazines and newspapers, and for a good long stretch she's far more famous than her mother will ever be. If you had stood in that farmyard around 1920 and asked which Wilder woman history would remember, not one person alive would have said Laura. They would all have said Rose. The bond between them is deep, and it is complicated, and I am going to leave the complications mostly where they lie, because they were private, and because two strong-willed women who love each other fiercely do not need a stranger diagnosing them 100 years on. What matters, for our story, is that Rose loved her parents, and worried over them, and never quite stopped trying to lift them out of the hard place she had watched them struggle in her whole childhood. She sent money when she had it. She came home for long stretches. She saw to it that electricity and comforts reached the farm, and at one point she had a fine little stone cottage built for them on the property, so her aging parents could be comfortable. She had climbed out of that poverty herself, and she spent a great deal of her life trying to reach back down and pull them out after her. But the thing Rose does that changes everything, the thing that turns this whole long story of loss into something the whole world would eventually read, is quieter than any of that. She listens to her mother's stories, and she realizes they are gold. Because Laura all this time has been a writer without quite knowing it. It starts almost by accident around 1911, when she's already in her 40s, Somebody asks her to write a little piece for a farm paper, the Missouri Ruralist, drawing on her knowledge of poultry and farm life, and she does, and it is good, and it turns into more. Before long she has a regular column, As a Farm Woman Thinks it is called, and in it, month after month, year after year, this woman who left school young and never graduated writes clear, warm, plain-spoken pieces for the farm wives of the Ozarks about home and family and the work of a woman's life and the wider world and her famous daughter's travels in it. She turns out to have a gift. Not a showy one. A true one. She can put a thing on paper the way it actually felt, plainly, without fuss, so that a tired woman reading it at her own kitchen table feels understood. It is the same gift that made her notice everything from that buggy seat all those years ago, only now it is going onto the page. And she is disciplined about it. She takes on other work too, serving for years as the secretary and treasurer of a local farm loan association. The person who arranges the small loans that let her neighbours buy their seed and their stock. A woman who knew exactly what a hard year could do to a family, sitting on the other side of the desk now, quietly helping other families through theirs. None of it makes them rich. The column pays a little. The farm, at last, pays its way. Between the two of them, and Rose's help, the Wilders in their 50s are finally something they have never once been in their whole married life. They are secure, not wealthy, just safe, able to sleep at night without the arithmetic. After everything, that alone would have been a fine ending. Two people who lost nearly everything young come at last to a solid house and a paid-for farm and a quiet, comfortable old age together. But it is not the ending, because the best part, the strangest and most beautiful turn in this whole long road, is still coming. And it comes because a restless daughter finally convinces her mother to sit down and write. Not a column this time, but the whole thing. All of it. The big woods, and the prairie, and the long winter, and the little houses, and the girl she used to be. To take the hardest years of her life, the very years we have just walked through together, and turn them into a story. The 1930s should have been the worst possible time to try to start something new. That is what makes what happens next feel almost like a kindness the world finally decided to hand them. Because the 30s open hard for Laura. Her mother Caroline, the May of the stories, dies in 1924. Her sister Mary, blind Mary, who she had helped send to that college a lifetime ago, dies in 1928. The people from the beginning of her life are leaving. And then, in 1929, the stock market falls to pieces, and the Great Depression comes down over the whole country, and the money that Laura and Rose had managed to put by takes a real hit along with everybody else's. Here they are, in their 60s, having finally clawed their way to security, watching the ground shift under them one more time. So, Laura does the thing she has quietly been getting ready to do her whole life without knowing it. She sits down to write it all down. Around 1930, partly for the plain reason that they could use the money, she writes out a manuscript she calls Pioneer Girl. It is her own true story, the real one, the whole account of her childhood on the frontier, the moving and the hardship and the long winter and all of it set down for grown-up readers, plain and unsoftened. The publishers turn it down. The adult autobiography does not sell. But somewhere in the back and forth, working with Rose, who knows the publishing world from the inside, an idea takes shape that is going to change everything. What if the childhood parts, the little house in the big woods of Wisconsin, the girl and her pa and her ma and the fiddle and the snow, what if that were told for children? A young reader, seeing it all fresh, the way she had seen it herself. In 1932, a book called Little House in the Big Woods is published. Laura Ingalls Wilder is 65 years old, and it works. It genuinely works. Children love it. Their mothers love it. That plain true gift she had, for putting a thing down the way it really felt, turns out to be exactly the thing that makes the stories live. Her first royalty check comes for $500, and I want you to hold that number up next to another one from earlier tonight. 50 cents a load for firewood not so many years before, and now $500 for a book. The hands that hauled the wood and the hand that held the pen belonged to the same two people. It just took the world a very long time to start paying for the right one. She does not stop at one. All through her late 60s and into her 70s, book after book comes out of that farmhouse. Farmer Boy, which is Almanzo's own story, the tale of his boyhood back in New York, So that the quiet man who never talked about himself gets a whole book of his childhood set down by his wife. Little House on the Prairie, on the banks of Plum Creek, by the shores of Silver Lake, the long winter, the true one, the one they had both lived through as young people in De Smet before they ever married. Little Town on the Prairie, these happy golden years, which ends, of course, with a young man driving a girl home behind a pair of fast horses. She writes their whole world into being, one book at a time, finishing the last of them in 1943 when she is 76 years old. And think about what that means sitting in that farmhouse. Everything that nearly destroyed them, every single hard thing we have walked through tonight, the poverty, the moving, the long winter, the struggle, all of it, turned in her hands into the thing that finally set them free. The suffering became the stories. The stories became the security they had chased across half a country and never once caught by farming. She did not get rich from the wheat, or the apples, or the land they bled for. She got comfortable at last, and then famous, and finally immortal, by taking the hardest years of her life and giving them to the world as something beautiful and true. There is a kind of justice in that so quiet and so complete that it can take your breath away if you sit with it. And Almanzo is there for it. That is the part I love best. He does not miss it. The quiet farmer with the cane, the man who lost his health, and his son, and years of his life and never once made a speech about any of it, gets to sit in the house he built with his own hands and watch his wife become one of the most beloved storytellers in the whole country. His childhood is in a book children read at bedtime. Their courtship, those buggy rides on the Dakota roads, is in a book. He lived it all once, poor and unknown, and now in his old age he gets to watch the whole of it come back, transformed into something the world treasures. And then the letters start coming, and then the cars. Because once the books take hold, readers want the real thing. They want to know that the little house was a real house, that Laura was a real girl, that Pa and Ma and Mary and the long winter all truly happened. And they discover that the woman who wrote them is alive, out on a farm in the Missouri Ozarks, an old woman now, with her old husband, in a rambling house at the top of a rocky ridge. So they come. Fan mail arrives from all over the world, more than the two of them can rightly answer, and carloads of readers begin finding their way up the road to Rocky Ridge Farm, hoping for a glimpse, a word, a look at the real place. And Laura and Almanzo, these two intensely private people, who spent their whole lives unknown and struggling, spend their last years greeting strangers at the door, side by side, the famous author and the farmer boy, in the house that fit her, at the top of the hill they had climbed the hard way. By the time the good years truly settled over them, the two of them had become something in Mansfield they had never had the chance to be anywhere else. They had become fixtures, known, part of a place. It is easy to skip past that, but it mattered to them more than almost anything, because they had spent the whole first half of their lives as strangers passing through. Newcomers on a claim, guests in somebody's kitchen, outsiders in a Florida backwoods, people with no place that was theirs and no neighbours who had known them long. And now, slowly, over the Mansfield decades, they put down the one kind of root they had never managed before. Not just land. People. Almanzo, quiet as ever, is a known man in town, respected the way a steady, honest, hard-working farmer gets respected in a small place over a long time. He is the fellow with the fine horses and the good eye, the one who can build or fix nearly anything, the man whose word is simply good. And Laura, who had been so alone in so many of the hard years, finds something in Mansfield she genuinely loves, which is the company of other women. She throws herself into the life of the town's clubs, the little societies where the farm women gathered to study and talk and better themselves, and she is good at it, sharp and well-read and full of opinions worth hearing. She helps organise them. She is, for the first time in her life, part of a circle of women who are hers, in a town that is hers, in a state she chose and stayed in. There is the church too, and the ordinary rhythm of a settled life. Sunday mornings, the seasons of a small farming town turning over one after another, planting and harvest and the county fair and the long green summers and the mild Ozark winters that must have felt like a gift after Dakota. Baskets carried to sick neighbours, the small daily traffic of belonging, of being known and knowing others, of a life woven quietly into other lives. You know what that is worth, if you have ever had it, and what its absence costs, if you have ever gone without it. To be known. To walk into a room and have people glad you came. To have a place where, if you did not turn up, someone would notice and wonder and come around to check. For two people who spent their youth as perpetual strangers, moving and moving and moving, that ordinary web of a settled small-town life was not a small thing at all. It might have been, quietly, one of the great rewards of the whole long climb. They had wanted all those years a place of their own, and what they got in the end was even better than land. They got a place that was theirs, full of people to whom they belonged. Let me tell you how she actually did it. The writing, because it is humbler and lovelier than you might picture. There was no grand study, no fine desk with a typewriter and a view. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote her books in pencil, by hand, on cheap-lined school tablets. The kind of nickel tablet a child would carry to a one-room schoolhouse, the orange-covered penny paper of the day. She sat at her kitchen table, the one built to her small height, and she filled those tablets in her clear sloping hand, page after page, remembering. She did not type. She was not, in her own mind, a grand author at all. She was a farm woman with a good memory and a pencil setting down the way it was. And then she would mail the tablets east to Rose, because by then her daughter had left the farm for good and settled far away, and the two of them made those books between them across a great distance by post. Laura would write out the memories in longhand and send the tablets off. Rose, the professional, the one who knew the hard world of editors and publishers from the inside, would read them and shape them and type them up and send questions and changes back. And Laura would answer and revise and send them on again. Back and forth, mother and daughter, across the whole width of the country, a package of penciled tablets going one way and a typed manuscript coming the other, for years. People have argued ever since about exactly who did what in that partnership. How much was Laura and how much was Rose? And I am not going to sit here and pretend to settle a thing that scholars who have read every letter still disagree about. Family memory says one thing, the manuscripts say another, and honestly both are probably a little true. What I will tell you is the plain shape of it, which is this. The life was Laura's. The memory was Laura's. The clear, true voice, the one that makes a tired woman feel understood at her own kitchen table, that was Laura's, and you can hear it in her columns long before Rose ever touched a little house book. And the daughter, the brilliant, restless daughter, helped carry it into the world. Between the two of them, by lamplight and by post, they turned a hard prairie girlhood into something that has put children to sleep, happy, for the better part of 100 years now. It does not need to be a scandal. It can just be a mother and a daughter making a beautiful thing together the only way they knew how. And of all the books that came out of those penciled tablets, there is one I have a real soft spot for, and it is the one about the boy in the buggy. Because Laura did not only write down her own childhood, she wrote down his. One of the very first books, published right after the first, is called Farmer Boy, and it is Almanzo's story, the tale of a single year of his boyhood, long before Dakota, long before the blizzard and the wheat and the cane, back when he was a small boy on his family's farm in the North Country of New York State. And here is the thing that makes it ache a little, if you know the rest of the story. That boyhood was rich. The Wilders, Almanzo's people, were not poor the way the Ingalls family was poor. They had a big, well-run, prosperous farm, and Farmer Boy is famous to this day for its food, because a hungry farm boy notices food above almost everything. The book is full of it. Stacks of pancakes with syrup, apple pies and donuts and great groaning holiday tables, fried apples and onions, a whole world of plenty, seen through the eyes of a 9-year-old boy who has never once had to wonder whether there would be enough. And little Almanzo in that book wants, more than anything in the world, one thing. He wants to be trusted to train a young colt of his own. Because of course he does. It was horses right from the very start. It was always going to be horses. So sit with the shape of that whole life for a moment. A boy raised in warmth and plenty, on a rich farm with all the food he could eat, and a heart set on fine horses, who grows up and drives 12 miles through a blizzard to save a starving town, who marries a poor girl and, within 4 years, loses his health, his son, his home, and every dollar he has, and spends the rest of his working life climbing back up out of that hole, one careful board at a time. And then, an old man gets to sit in the house he built and watch his wife hand his own lost boyhood back to the world, the pancakes and the colt and all of it, in a book that children will read at bedtime for a century. The farmer boy who had everything and then had nothing, and then, at the very end, quietly had enough. His whole life bound up in a few small volumes, written in pencil at a kitchen table by the girl he used to drive home through the snow. Now, there is something worth stopping over in those books, because it is the very thing that first pulled a lot of you to a channel like this one, and it is this. Laura did not put everything in. She wrote for children. She made that choice early and she kept it, and it shaped what went onto the page and what quietly stayed off it. So the books are true, mostly, in their bones. But they are the gentle version, the firelight version, and a great deal of what we have sat with tonight is exactly the part she chose to leave in the dark. The baby boy, for one. Her own son, born and lost in that terrible Dakota August. He is nowhere in the Little House books. Not a line. A woman who wrote her whole childhood down to the smell of her mother's bread simply closed the door on that one room and never opened it for her readers, and you can hardly blame her. And there is the matter of her father. In the books, Pa is close to perfect. He is warm and merry and brave, with his fiddle and his blue eyes, and every time the family pulls up stakes and moves on, it feels like an adventure, like the pull of the wide free West. The records tell a harder story. A lot of that moving was not adventure. It was debt. It was crops that failed and rent that could not be paid, and a restless man staying just ahead of what he owed, dragging a wife and daughters along behind him from one hard start to the next. Some of you caught that, watching these stories, the way a grown woman catches things a child never could, that the merry moving might have felt very different from the back of the wagon if you were the mother, holding it all together, with no say in when the next leaving came. Laura knew both versions. She had lived the hard one, and she chose, on purpose, to give the world the warm one. Not because she was lying, because she was doing something a little more interesting than telling the truth or telling a lie. She was deciding what a childhood was for, in the remembering of it. She kept the love and the fiddle and the snow and the safety, and she quietly carried the rest herself off the page, the way she had watched her own mother carry things. It is the same thing Almanzo did with his cane and his silence. You keep the hard part, you carry it quietly out of everyone's sight, and you let the people you love have the light instead, which is maybe why the losing of the old ones hit her the way it did in those Missouri years. Because one by one, the people who had lived the real version with her were going. Her father had gone first, long before, back at the turn of the century, dying in Day Smet in 1902, while Laura was already down in Missouri, too far and too poor to easily get back. Then, in the 1920s, her mother Carolyn, the real Ma, the woman who had held that whole moving household together with her hands and her silence. Then Mary, in 1928. Blind Mary, the big sister from the very first book, gone. Grace would follow, and Carrie, the little sisters, until Laura was the last one left of that whole family that had set out across the prairie in a covered wagon when she was a girl. The last one who remembered the big woods for herself. The last keeper of the real version. And I think that is a good part of why she wrote them when she did, in her 60s, in the teeth of the Depression, with such a quiet urgency. Because the world she came from was not just gone, it was going. The people who had lived it were dying off one by one, and the frontier itself was passing out of living memory, into the flat pages of history books, and Laura Ingalls Wilder sat in a farmhouse in the Ozarks and understood, the way you understand a thing at 60 and cannot at 20, that if she did not set it down now, in her own hand, the way it truly felt, then the smell of that bread and the sound of that fiddle and the whole warm lost world of it would simply vanish when she did. So she raced it. An old woman, racing the disappearing of everything she came from, with a pencil at a kitchen table built to her height, and she won. Between the writing and the losing, though, there were the good ordinary days, and I would not want to leave you with the idea that the end of their life was all elegy, because it was not. It was mostly quiet and good. Picture one of those days at Rocky Ridge in the settled years. The orchard that made them wait 7 years is old and heavy now, and in the spring the whole hillside goes white and pink with apple blossom, and the whole place smells of it. Almanzo is out among his goats, or down in his workshop where the floor is deep in curled shavings, and the walls are hung with the tools he has used his whole life, making something, always making something. A small chair, a box, a mended thing, working slow and sure with the hands that never once let him down. There are horses in the field because there are always horses, and he goes and stands with them a while, an old man and his Morgans, and neither of them is in any hurry. And Laura is at her desk, or in her kitchen, or out at her flower beds, which she loves nearly as much as she loves the writing. The house is warm from the stone fireplaces he built out of their own rocky ground. There is bread again, most likely, because there is nearly always bread, and in the evening the two of them sit the way they have sat for 50 years and more, an old farmer and his wife not needing to say much, watching the light go long and gold across a hillside they bled for and finally got to keep. If you had passed the place on the road on an evening like that, you would have seen two very old people on a porch, and you would never have guessed, not in 100 years, everything the two of them had walked through to earn that quiet. That is the thing about the people who have survived the most. Very often, from the outside, they just look peaceful. If you want to understand Almanzo Wilder, the whole of him, from the boy to the old man, follow the horses. They are the one thread that runs unbroken through his entire life, and the story of him keeping them and losing them and getting them back is really the story of everything. It starts when he is a small boy on that rich New York farm, where the thing he wants more than anything in the world is to be trusted with a colt of his own. It carries him into his young manhood as the fellow with the matched team that could outrun anything in the county. The fast horses that made him proud and, let us be honest, did a good deal of his courting for him. Because a girl remembers the man who came skimming across the snow to fetch her home. Horses are how the town first knew him. Horses carried him and Cap Garland 12 miles into a killing winter and hauled the wheat back that kept De Smet alive. In the good early years of the marriage there were always horses in his field and a fine team in his barn, and then in the hard years the horses are the thing he has to give up. That is the detail that tells you how bad it truly got, better than any number, because a man will sell a great many things before he sells the horses he loves. They are the last to go, and when they go, you know the bottom has been reached. Somewhere in those years of drought and debt and 36 cents on the dollar, the fine fast horses, the ones that were his pride and his joy and half his identity, get quietly sold because you cannot keep driving horses when you cannot buy bread. Picture him standing in the empty barn after. That is a grief he never wrote down and never spoke of, but you can feel the shape of it. The thing he loved most, sold to keep his family fed. But here is the mercy in it, the same mercy that runs through this whole long story. He gets them back. At Rocky Ridge, once the worst is over, once the farm is theirs and the fear has finally eased, Almanzo Wilder keeps horses again. Morgans, the breed he loved best his whole life. The same kind he had dreamed of as a boy. And there they are in his field into his old age right to the very end. An old man with a cane, out among his horses in the evening light, in no hurry at all, home at last. Everything else in his life got taken and returned, just taken and returned. His health, mostly taken and never quite given back. His homes, lost and rebuilt. His fortunes, ruined and slowly remade. And the horses ran right alongside all of it, the truest measure of where he stood, sold at the bottom and standing in his field again at the top, so that when, as a very old man, he learns to drive an automobile and takes to the open road one last time, it is not really a new thing at all. It is just the same old love, the same boy who wanted a colt, still wanting to be moving, still happiest with something quick and strong under his hand and the whole road out ahead of him. He never did change, not in the deep places. He just finally got to grow old in peace, among the horses, in a field that no one could ever take away from him again. I want to give you their old age slowly, because they earned a slow old age more than almost anyone, and because after all that running, the best thing I can tell you about the end of their lives is that, at last, they got to be still. The farm is a real farm now, a good one. The apple orchard that made them wait 7 years bears heavy in the fall. There are hens and cows and Almanzo's goats, which he is fond of past all reason. And there are horses, because there are always horses where Almanzo is, right to the end. He keeps his Morgans, the breed he loved his whole life, and even as an old man with a cane, he is never happier than when he is out among them. The place that started as a windowless cabin and 50-cent loads of firewood is, by their old age, one of the prettiest little farms in the county, and it is paid for, and it is theirs, and nobody is ever going to take it from them. And then, in one of the gentlest jokes this story ever plays, Almanzo Wilder learns to drive a car. Sit with that for a second, because it is perfect. The whole of their love began with this man and his fast horses, the young fellow whose matched team could eat up 12 miles of frozen road while everyone else plodded. The driver, the man who was never so much himself as when he had the reins in his hands and something quick under him. And now here he is, an old man, his horse and buggy days long behind the whole country, sitting behind the wheel of an automobile, learning the new machine the way he once learned the old team. It gives them back something they had lost. It gives them the road again. The two of them, old now, take long trips in that car, all the way to California, up to the Pacific Northwest, and more than once the long way back to De Smet, to see what remained of the Ingalls family in the country where it all began. The boy who loved fast horses ends his days as an old man who loved his car, and it is the same love, really, the whole way through. He always did want to be moving. He just finally got to choose when. Their days, in the good long evening of their lives, are small and full. Almanzo is forever out in his shop, making something, because a man does not spend 70 years working with his hands and then simply stop. He builds, he mends, he tends the goats and the horses, he moves slow and careful on his cane through a life that has finally, mercifully, gotten easy. Laura writes, and keeps her kitchen, the one built to her height, and works her flower beds, and answers what fan mail she can. They do not need to fill the silences anymore. 60 years will do that to two people. They have said everything that needs saying, most of it without words, and what is left is just the deep, worn comfort of a person who has been beside you through absolutely everything, and is still, thank God, beside you now. They had been married more than 60 years by then. 60 years. Think of everything those two had walked through since the sleigh bells on the snow, and here they were, at the end of it, in a warm house, on a paid-for hill, an old farmer and his famous wife, sitting out the fine evenings together with nowhere left they had to be. Almanzo goes first. It is the autumn of 1949. His heart, which had carried him through so much, begins to give out. 2 attacks close together in the month of October, and on the 23rd of that month, at home, on the farm, in the house he built with his own 2 hands, Almanzo Wilder dies. He's 92 years old, or 90, depending on which birthday you chose to believe, and he had earned every one of those years the hard way. They had been married 64 years. 64 years. From a cold buggy on a Dakota road to a quiet room in a farmhouse in the Ozarks. From 2 young people who had no idea what was coming to 2 old ones who had survived all of it together without ever once letting go. He was the man who drove straight into the blizzard for a starving town when he could have stayed home safe, who got up off his sickbed too soon because it would not wait, who spent 20 years building his small wife a house measured to her body. And now he sets down the load, gently in his own home, with 64 years of marriage behind him and the woman he called Bess close by. There are far worse ways for a long life to end than that. There are far worse stories than a marriage that lasted 64 years and only ended because one of them, at 92, quietly ran out of days. The house goes very quiet after that, but she's not done yet. Laura has a little further to go, and she goes it, the way she did everything on her own 2 feet. Laura lives 8 more years without him, and she lives them, right to the end, exactly the way you would hope she would, which is to say on her own terms, in her own house, answering to no one. She's 82 years old when Almanzo dies, and a lesser woman, a more ordinary woman, might have folded up and gone to live with relatives, might have let the farm and the years close over her. Laura does not. She stays. She stays in the house he built, the one measured to her small frame, and she keeps it herself. And she keeps a good deal of the place going, and she manages, with the book money finally coming in steady, to be that rarest thing for a widow of her generation, entirely independent. She does not need looking after. She looks after herself. She tends her flowers. She keeps up a wide correspondence, writing letters to editors and to friends, and to the endless stream of readers who still write to her from all over the world, children and grown-ups alike, telling her what her books meant to them. And the cars still come up the road. Even now, even as one old woman alone, the fans find their way to Rocky Ridge, and she greets them, the way she and Almanzo greeted them together, the small famous author at the door of the farmhouse on the hill. There is a loneliness in those 8 years, and I will not pretend there is not. 64 years is a long time to have somebody beside you, and the quiet of a house after that kind of marriage is a very particular quiet. But there is also a great deal of peace in them. She has her work, she has her memories, which she had spent her whole later life learning to set down on paper. And she has the deep, settled contentment of a woman who went through the fire, all of it, and came out the far side into calm. Her own health finally begins to fail in her late 80s. There is diabetes, undiagnosed for a while, and her heart begins to tire the way hearts do at the end of a long road. Rose, her brilliant, restless daughter, comes home to see to her, and Laura, being Laura, is not much interested in being fussed over, and comes back home from the hospital about as fast as anyone will let her, because if she's going to go, she means to go from her own house, which is what she does. On the 10th of February, 1957, Laura Ingalls Wilder dies peacefully in her sleep, at home at Rocky Ridge, just 3 days after her 90th birthday. She had outlived her Almanzo by 8 years and reached almost exactly the same age he did. They lay her to rest beside him, in the cemetery at Mansfield, Missouri, in the ground of the country they had finally, after all that wandering, chosen and kept. The buggy driver and the girl he drove home back together at the top of the last hill they climbed, and here is the strange and quiet arithmetic of what they left behind, because it is not what you would guess. They left no one. That is the part that catches you. Rose, their bright, difficult world-travelling daughter, lived on until 1968, a famous writer in her own right to the end. But Rose had lost her own only child, a baby boy, decades before, back in her young womanhood, and she never had another. So when Rose died, the direct line of Laura and Almanzo Wilder died with her. There are no grandchildren carrying their blood down the years, no great-grandchildren at the family table. The little boy who died at 12 days in Dakota, and Rose's lost baby, and then Rose herself, and that was the end of the family, in the plain flesh and blood sense. If you had measured their life by that oldest and simplest yardstick, children and children's children, you would have to call it a line that stopped. And yet there is almost no one listening tonight who does not know their names. The books Laura wrote in that farmhouse have been read by more children than she could have counted in 100 lifetimes, translated into dozens of languages, carried into millions of homes in countries she never saw. The house Almanzo built with his ruined legs and his good hands still stands, cared for, walked through by visitors who come from all over the world to see the real place. Long after they were gone, their story was made into a television show that a whole other generation grew up on, and their names went out again to millions more. The couple who left no descendants left instead one of the most beloved family stories in the entire history of their country. They could not keep their son. They could not keep their farm, the first time or the second or the third. For most of their lives they could not keep anything at all, it seemed, but each other. And that, in the end, turned out to be the one thing worth keeping, the one thing that made all the rest of it into a story instead of just a sorrow. Two people on a cold road a long time ago who decided to stay and stayed through everything for 64 years. That is what remained. That is what always remains when everything else has been lost and burned and buried and grown over. Not the wheat, not the houses, just the staying. So let us walk back through it, slowly, one last time, the way you walk back through a house turning out the lamps before we let it go for the night. You started on a cold road, in a sleigh, with the harness bells and the breath freezing on a girl's collar, and a quiet young man who could not stop finding reasons to make the drive. You stood in a plain parlour on an August morning while she married him in a black dress, and would not promise to obey. You watched a little grey house go up, and a cradle come into it, and a small girl named for the wild roses. You felt the hot wind come across the wheat and burn a year to nothing. You saw the cane go by the door. You sat in the terrible quiet after a baby boy who lived 12 days, and you smelled the smoke where a house used to be. You climbed into a wagon and crossed half a country on a lost and found $100, and you stood on a rocky Missouri hill and called it home. You watched a man with ruined legs build his small wife a house shaped to her own small body, cabinet by cabinet over 20 patient years. You saw the apple trees finally bloom. You heard an old farmer learn to drive a car, and you sat on a porch at the end with two very old people who had walked through all of it together and were, against every reasonable expectation, still holding on. They were only people. That is the thing to hold on to at the end. Not saints, not legends, not the soft figures from a children's book, just two ordinary people, proud and hopeful and stubborn and scared, the way we all quietly are who happen to get handed more than their share of the hard things, and who decided over and over without ever once making a speech about it to stay, to get up in the morning, to do the next thing, to give each other the warm version and carry the cold one alone. 64 years of that. That was the whole secret. There was never any other secret. And now, as you lie here in your own ordinary bed, warm and safe, with the door shut against the weather, and nothing at all pulling at your sleeve, let yourself feel for just a moment how much that quiet is worth. No wagon to load in the morning, no wheat to watch, no arithmetic waiting in the dark, just a soft place that holds its heat all night and asks nothing of you at all. Rest easy now. The cold roads and the long winters and the small graves are all very far away, 100 years gone and more, softened into a story, unable to touch you or anyone you love. Their wagons have long since come to rest, and you, tonight, have nowhere in the world you need to be, and nothing to do, and nowhere to go but gently down into sleep. Good night.